Lou for Conservative Party.
Thank you, Commissioner. For the record, my name is Noah Liu, and I'm counsel to the Conservative Party of Canada. Mr. Mendicino, as Minister of Public Safety, when you received a warrant authorization package, I understand that you would receive a number of materials, which would include the warrant application, the affidavits in support of it, and a briefing note from your department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And can you explain generally, without going into specifics, what would be in the departmental briefing note? And in particular, I'm wondering whether it would include a recommendation.
It would be a summary of the warrant, and it would be accompanied with a recommendation, and it would be affixed under the signature of the Deputy Minister.
And would those briefing notes be dated?
I'm going back into my time. I believe the general practice was to date them, but I believe on several occasions they weren't always dated. So, you know, there were some occasions where the memo may not have been dated, but certainly as time went on, they were increasingly dated, and I thought that that was a good practice.
Okay, thank you. And would the warrant application typically come with a tracking sheet that showed who had handled the warrant application before you and when?
Yes, and it takes different labels, a tracking sheet, a routing slip that shows all of the different steps that are taken before it gets to my desk. Yes.
Including the intermediary steps within your office? Within
yes.
Your ministerial office, okay.
Yes.
And would you typically notice, in general, how long a warrant application had been sitting with your ministerial office staff before you signed off on it?
To be frank, I cut right to the quick and got into the reading of the warrant itself because, as we've discussed, they are complex documents. And so I was aware that there were routing slips on it, and I would typically see that my deputy minister and my chief of staff were two of the checks in the box along the way to my desk. And then I would get into the business of focusing on the task at hand, which was to review the warrant, to ensure that the requirements of the law were met, and to put back any questions to my officials if I had them.
And do you think you would notice if there was an unusual delay?
For sure. But you asked earlier about dating, and I do recall that on several occasions I saw routing slips where maybe dates had not been entered. And, again, in the interest of being quite frank, was a question at a time when we wanted to get to the decision as quickly as possible. But I did see an improvement on the practice of date and time stamping to, I think, ensure good tracking, good routing. And I think that speaks to the way in which we have strengthened the flow of information and intelligence within government.
Thank you. I'm going to move to a different topic. You spoke this morning, Mr. Mendicino, about authorizing the use of threat reduction measures, or TRMs. TRMs are a tool that have been available since 2015, correct?
Well, in my opinion, threat reduction measures and the types of threat reduction measures that I authorized came in the form of the legislation that was approved under 2019, which was then called Bill C-59. And this is a very specific type of legal mechanism, which in some instances does require ministerial approval. And as you may know, Council, I approved threat reduction measures for a number of parliamentarians who had been targeted. So I just want to be clear that the mechanism that I deployed to mitigate against the threats came in the form of the new legislation under Bill C-59 in 2019.
So you've anticipated my next question, which was that although, as you said, sometimes the minister would need to authorize TRMs, in other circumstances, CSIS could employ them without ministerial authorization?
I think there is some flexibility and scope for CSIS to undertake measures to mitigate against threats. And C-59 was put into place to remove any ambiguity about what the precise scope of their mandate and their ability to reduce those threats were. And so, going back to my experience in my time as the Minister of Public Safety, C-59 was another tool that we added to our arsenal, which I think was very positive, precisely because it strengthens transparency and accountability about how these decisions are taken when it comes to threats of foreign interference in the political space, and specifically when we are talking about parliamentarians. And that transparency and that accountability is critically important to maintain the confidence of Canadians in this institution.
So, just in brief, CSIS can employ TRMs without ministerial authorization at times.
There may be techniques and tactics that they can use to reduce threats of foreign interference that do not require ministerial approval, but when certain criteria and thresholds have been met under C-59, they do have to seek ministerial approval, including where someone's charter rights, including privacy, may be in play. And so that is a mechanism by which we ensure that that balancing exercise that we have been speaking about is being properly undertaken. And just to add a little bit more context, the proportionality of those threat reduction measures under C-59 has to comport with the nature of the threat itself, so as to avoid any potential overreach.
Okay, thank you. Could the operator please bring up WIT 40105? If you could scroll to page 6 once it's up, please.
Could you repeat the document ID, please?
WIT 40105. Actually, I'm looking for paragraph 26. So you've spoken a bit about this already, but it would be correct to say that threat reduction measures include the ability for CSIS to notify members of Parliament of issues concerning national security that are relevant to those members of Parliament and that may necessitate action?
I do, and just let me briefly expand. The threat reduction measures that I authorized were put into place to provide a more secure environment so that CSIS could share information about what those threats were vis-a-vis the parliamentarians in question. And over time, I do think that the protocols that will be developed now that Bill C-70 has become law around sharing of information, the procedures around declassifying information can all be better deployed in the context of threat reduction measures as a way of preventing and mitigating against any threats to parliamentarians and foreign interference.
And so that same rule or that same ability would also apply to members of Parliament who are leaders of a political party, correct?
For sure.
So just to be clear, a leader of a political party could receive a threat reduction measure briefing if CSIS believe that there are issues concerning national security that are relevant to that leader and that may necessitate action, correct?
Subject to appropriate screening. And we've talked in the past about the need to ensure that before we share highly classified and sensitive information, that the individuals that are part of that dialogue are vetted according to the protocols that have been put in place. And I don't think we can gloss over that fact. So yes, you're right. If you are the leader of a political party and you have become a threat, I beg your pardon, you've become a target of a threat to foreign interference, then there should be a protocol in place to share information, but that may very well be subject to the appropriate screening of that individual prior to the sharing of the information to ensure that it is protected.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, those were my questions for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.